today. I'm Jennifer Tersini with Raise the Bar Consulting, and this is the final session in our Courageous Conversations fall series, which is about non-hierarchical leadership. The presenters are Ann Yellett, Dr. Ann Yellett, and Sapir Khalsa, both of whom work with the Culture of Peace Alliance here in Tucson. And, you know, for the first time, I would say in my consulting career this year, our firm received, and I received, multiple requests from organizations. The irony not lost on me, that went something like this. Hey, can you teach us how to do non-hierarchical leadership in our organization? So I thought, well, I know some things, but there are people in town who do this all the time, right? They live it. And the best way to learn about non-hierarchical leadership is from others who are engaging in it, and perhaps yourselves, rather than maybe hiring an outside expert to create a hierarchical structure where they train all of you in how to be non-hierarchical. So I was super excited. I reached out. I've known of Sapir and Ann's work for many years. And I reached out and I said, hey, what do you think? Because people are asking about this and they want to know how to do it. And so I'm super excited that they're here with us today and willing to share with you how they live this work, how they do this work, and the trials and tribulations, right? The actual real nitty gritty things that, that come about when you're fully committed to working in a different model. So without further ado, I'm just going to pass the baton to both Sapir and Ann to introduce themselves and then get started. So thank you so much for being with us today. And then actually what we're going to do as well is mute the rest of the group for the call. So when you'd like to ask a question, you can do so in the chat or unmute yourself and chime in when it feels right. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, so much for inviting us to do this. I want to do a land acknowledgement. Even though we're in virtual space, those of us that live in Tucson are living on, and is my sound okay?
No.
Sapir, the team cannot hear you. Can you come closer to the machine?
I'm on this. So this is not working.
Yeah.
It's better now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hold it up then. Let me, if people can turn their volumes up on their computers, they might hear it better. Because you control the volume. And is that any better? Okay, I can turn mine up too. Okay, and you can also turn your volume up on your computer, and that can also help you. Okay, technical stuff always. Anyway, again, thank you. I want to do a land acknowledgement because we are, those of us in Tucson, this is the Honoatom land. Some places are Pasquayaki, and I want to express appreciation that the land exists because, not because, but the land existed in their nation long before we came along, and we are on it now. You know, and and here we are. And if you can think about, if you're in other places other than Tucson, think about who might have, I don't want to say owned, it's really hard what word to use. Who might have lived on the land before you came, you know? So, and that's a whole, can be very complicated.
Sapir, somehow you became muted after.
Yeah. Okay, can you hear me? This is, okay, tech stuff, no problem. I did not mute myself. That's very interesting. So I also want to thank you all, the participants, for being here. And I want you to, I mean, the irony is that I'm sure many of you are using non-hierarchical methods for decision making and organization within your organizations and your committees and your groups that you and your, if you do activist work. So the irony is that we were not selected because we know more than you. We were selected because Jennifer knows me and knows of how we've talked about our unique COPA, Culture, Peace, Alliance's unique structure. And so there is an irony in, as if there's a hierarchy of those who are doing it better than others. And that's not accurate. That's not accurate because, frankly, I never considered any other method. Having grown up in the 60s and 70s, I never considered any other way of looking at open space technologies and different kinds of things like that, other than trying to cull the collective wisdom of the group that was forming the Culture of Peace Alliance. And Ann will go into the history a bit more because it's quite interesting. So I want to, the first thing we wanted to do is, let's see how many of us others, there's 16. If any of you have any strong expectation, like one strong expectation of what you will get from the meeting, it'd be good for us to know that. So we'll go around and you'll say your name, your organization or association, and briefly, please, one strong expectation you might have for this meeting. Okay, so I'm gonna call on people because that's more efficient and effective when we're in Zoom, and Ann's nodding to agree with that. So Jennifer, I'm gonna call on you next to do that.
Jennifer Blair or Jennifer Tersini? Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Blair. I'm with the Alliance of Arizona Nonprofits. And I didn't really have any specific expectations coming out of this meeting. I just happened to have been fortunate enough to view a lot of the events in this series and always learn so much. And they're always great quality events. And that's why I signed up.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Mark, can you unmute and respond to that question?
Yes, hi everybody. Mark Clem. I am the secretary on the Culture of Peace Alliance coordinating committee. And I was a member in the past. I took a hiatus for several years. I am now back again recently over the next few months. And I want to learn more about non-hierarchical leadership and how it's evolved within COPA and how we can move forward with it too. So, and expand it and improve on it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Georgia, I'll call on you next.
Sorry, I wasn't quite ready. Yes, I'm Georgia Conroy, and I'm a member of WILF, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. I hope you hear me okay.
Yep.
And the 22nd Street Veterans for Peace. And I guess I kind of expect it to be a learning experience for me and also experiential. And I want to do a lot of listening and maybe contribute at times. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Georgia. Jean from Beads of Courage. Jean, I don't know if I met you, but many years ago after the shooting at the Safeway of some of our dear community members, including Gabby Giffords, I was part of the planning team that put together that children's event, and you were there. Your group was there. And thank you so much for that. That was an awesome and unique experience. Okay,
Great.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So Jean with Beads of Courage, and I just really love everything that Jennifer and Raise the Bar put out there, and I happen to be available this afternoon. I guess my curiosity was piqued because I'm curious if there's a difference between servant leadership versus non-hierarchical. So that really piqued my interest because I use that coin with my team. As I've grown Beads of Courage, I now manage 13 staff. And I'm like, hey guys, we're all interdependent. Like, I'm not your boss. Like, the whole ship will fail. If you don't do your job, you do your job. So I'm really excited about today's topic.
Thank you, Jean. Mike, you're next. You have to unmute, Mike.
Mike Rohrback with CCLAC. We are a digital literacy group encouraging young people to become mentors for adults and seniors on learning how to communicate digitally. My interest is, as an organization grows, how do you keep the non-hierarchical way of operating? Do you have some clues or some neat tools or something? And thank you, Jennifer, again for all of this series. Fabulous.
Thank you, Mike. And Mike, we've actually emailed each other. I'm glad to see your face. Deborah, can you go next, please?
There we go. Yeah, my name is Deborah Jefferson, and I'm here because I was on the email list, but I am a board member on the Tucson Women's Chorus, which may seem strange for why I would be here and listening to this, but we are, as I think many choruses are and many groups are trying to figure out how we fit in and how we're going to move forward in this world. Because I myself personally, we may go back to singing, but the world isn't going to be like it was before. So I have heard about non-hierarchical, that a lot of the networking going on and the collaboration right now with the movements is non-hierarchical in the big picture. And so when I saw this, I thought, I really want to know more about that. What does that look like? And the second thing is that I'm on a board. We have a president and we have a vice president and the whole hierarchical thing and who does what. And my personal opinion, it doesn't work really well. And so I thought, well, what would another way look like? And maybe this is something, and we're kind of in the midst of trying to figure that out right now. And not that this pandemic is a blessing in anything, but it has been and has given many organizations, including ours, a time to pause and reflect on where we're going and where we're headed and what is this going to look like. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Sylvia, can you go next, please?
I'm here because I support COPA, Sudbury, and Ann.
Thank you. That's so nice. John, can you go next, please? Do you know him, Jennifer or Cynthia, so you can? No? Okay, we'll come back to John. Innocent, can you please go next?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Innocent Saunders. I'm a consultant. My firm is called Groundwork for a Change. And I'm here today because as a consultant who typically helps organizations with their strategic planning and board development, the issue of power hoarding versus power sharing often comes up, particularly when you try and do this work through, a diversity and equity lens, and really examining what that looks like for myself as a consultant. But in any event, I thought it would be awesome to hear from an organization and folks who have operated successfully in a non-hierarchical nature and what the power sharing looks like there. just kind of for my own, information gathering and encouragement, and the like. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Innocent. Okay, John put his hand up, so John, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself, though. John, we're trying to recognize you, but you need to unmute to speak.
And John, if you're having trouble unmuting, if you place something in the chat, we'll see. I see you don't have a microphone. Go ahead and write in the chat whenever you'd like, and we'll call that out to share. Thanks, John. The question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sapir.
No, go ahead, Jennifer. That's good.
Would you repeat the question for John?
Sure. John, just say your affiliation or organization and just one expectation you might have for this workshop. I'm so sorry, I did not realize you didn't have a microphone. So thank you for your patience. Okay, we'll look for that in the chat and read it out once we get it. Angela, can you go next, please?
Yes, I am the Regional Director of Northern Arizona for the Alliance of Arizona Nonprofits. We are a pretty flat organization, so we're just trying to kind of figure out resources that we could use to maintain that non-hierarchical management.
Okay, thank you. Beverly, can you go next? Another friend of mine.
Hi, so I haven't been able to come to your Wednesday webinars, Jennifer. I'm just not available. So it was good to see this one on Thursday. So I'm the program director for Candlelighters Childhood Cancer Foundation, and it's fundamentally a parent organization. So I think we do have a lot of lateral input, and we're not a very big organization, so hierarchical structure is not too much of a problem. But I'm interested because we do a lot of collaboration with other small nonprofits. And we do camps. We do several camps throughout the year. I try to keep them in Southern Arizona, but I think my biggest challenge in doing those camps is we rent from other organizations like the Boy Scouts that do have high hierarchical structures, and actually it's been difficult. And even the YMCA camp. So I've had some really surprisingly difficult situations in renting those places and then trying to fit in with even pre-agreements and understandings ahead of time. But when I get on the property, I'm like, oh my goodness, if you told me this, I would have done A, B, or C or whatever. So I think that's when I think of hierarchical, that's where I think my biggest stumbling block is.
Okay, thank you, Beverly. Interesting aspect, I appreciate it. And then we have Dorothy Barth. Dorothy, if you're clear on what we're doing, just go ahead and answer. If you need the repeat of the question, I will do that for you.
I think I've got it. I'm Dorothy Barth, and I work with both Satbir and Yalit at COPA, Culture of Peace Alliance, and I wanted to know what they're thinking.
Okay, thank you, Dorothy. Okay, now I'm sorry.
When I say work, I mean I volunteer with the organization.
How true that is. Jennifer or Cynthia, do you want to say anything?
I just want to call out that John responded in the chat and said that he is with La Posada, and they have various groups that participate in decision making. It's important for them to be inclusive, and that's why he's interested in being in the call today.
And Cynthia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Cynthia Wasco. I work for Habitat for Humanity Tucson's my full-time job, and I have been a, I don't know, co-producer. I don't know what to call myself. I've been in partnership with Jennifer and Raise the Bar Consulting with a lot of these series that we've been doing. I think my career has always been a nonprofit with a very traditional hierarchical leadership structures. So I'm really interested to learn more about this structure and how it could fit into the greater nonprofit world.
Thank you so much. My expectation is that we meet some of your expectations without, and yet be very authentic about how it's a continuum, not a finished product. And Anne can say her expectation as we move into her presentation, because she's presenting next. Thank you so much, everyone. And here is Anne.
Thank you so much, Satbir, and welcome to everybody. It's wonderful to be here and to see you all, those that at least that I can see on the screen here, and to be with you today to explore this topic together. And one of my expectations is to be learning from all of you today and from Satbir, because we really haven't, we very, very briefly spoken with each other about each of our thoughts that we were putting together for this presentation. But I know she's done quite a bit of research and has pulled together some resources that actually I think are going to be really helpful for us to use in COPA to re-examine, you know, these issues. So as Satbir mentioned, both of us actually were involved in the early days of forming the Culture of Peace Alliance, which came together by a number of organizations collaborating and coming together to build to really help build a culture of peace here in Tucson, and doing that collectively or collaboratively together. So that was one thing, is when we started the structure, we started it with representatives from a number of different organizations that all overlapped in some fashion. You know, we had some kind of commitment to peace building in various forms. And so we came together and held some sessions, some sort of collective sharing sessions in the community, and had 40 or 50 different groups come together to talk. The Peace Center was definitely one of them, a number of lots of other groups that were overlapping in terms of interest. And then out of that came a collective group of people who committed to stay together for a year. It turned out to be about a year and a half, to actually form the structure of the Culture of Peace Alliance, and being very mindful about what we were doing and why we were doing it, and kind of what was the background and what were the values, and, you know, really examining all of that. So thinking back to that structure, as well as a much earlier collective endeavor, which happened here in Tucson in the 70s, early in the 70s, with women coming together to form a number of different organizations that were based on feminist principles. And as we understood those, at least at the time, and also examined issues around all the different isms, you know, that we were just really, as young women, becoming mindful about racism and classism and homophobia, and, you know, different issues that we were, social justice issues that we were concerned about. So again, in preparation for this meeting, I found myself reflecting back on that early kind of organizing work that was done by a number of women here in Tucson to form the Tucson Center for Women and Children, the first shelter for battered women and their children, and then the Rape Crisis Center, and what was called the Women's Company and the Young Women's Company. They were non-traditional job training programs. So I kind of put together some ideas. I'm gonna try to screen share right now with kind of an overview of those ideas, and we'll hope that that's gonna work. And we'll see if that, all right, looks like that's working. Is everybody able to I can't see everybody at this point because I'm screen sharing. So I don't know if others of you could just be sure if anybody can't see that the screen share.
We see your screen, yeah.
Okay, it's good. All right, good. So, so this is a kind of a title page, obviously, and I've had the benefit really of most of my life working within non-hierarchical structures, in part because that was many of our inclinations. I mean, Sapir talked about coming of age, if you will, during the 60s and the 70s, and there was so much happening in the 60s and the 70s that was challenging all of the traditional ways of thinking about things, doing things, organizing structures, decision-making processes, and all of that. So just tried to put together some of the main thoughts that I have, and by no means do I feel at all like an expert. In fact, it's been many years since I've given real thought to these issues. So that's one thing I just want to express some gratitude for this opportunity to have to reflect on these issues again. And I know from a little bit that I heard from Sapir that she has found some excellent resources that hopefully we'll be able to make use of within COPA to re-examine these issues. You know, we looked at them when we formed COPA, as I mentioned, back in around 2005, 2006, thereabouts. But really, then we kind of plunged into creating programs and working programs and, you know, just kind of trying to put into practice what we were doing. But I haven't been necessarily following all the guidelines that I've put together here. So this is kind of a reminder. This opportunity today is a reminder of some of the things we're going to be talking about. So let's see, let's switch down here to the next slide. And that is, okay, so some of you may be in organizations that you're thinking of transforming or transitioning into a more hierarchical, non-hierarchical or egalitarian kind of a structure. And some of you may be creating programs or just starting a program or thinking about starting a program and wanting to be much more conscious and mindful of how you set it up. What's the structure that you use? Or as some of you mentioned, you're still a pretty grassroots, volunteer-based, small program. And as things hopefully happen when programs are being effective in our community, they grow, they start to grow and mushroom and do more work and have more people involved. And, you know, maybe go from paying stipends, contractual stipends to people, to actually being able to pay salaries to people. And then you have to start dealing with some of these core issues about what kind of a structure are you. So being mindful, you know, just being very mindful of why you're making a selection, why you want to create a certain kind of structure, or why you want to take the time and trouble and thoughtfulness of shifting the kind of structure that you have. And so you want to discuss, you know, within your group, what are the values, what are the theoretical or the philosophical, you know, ideas that are driving, you know, your decision about shifting to a different kind of structure. And I mentioned earlier that when we started the Tucson Center for Women and Children, many of us were coming from a feminist perspective. There's a feminist notion that the personal is political. So when I speak about, you know, when I mentioned earlier, just a little bit above here about what are your political beliefs or your philosophical beliefs, by political, I'm using this notionality of the person is political. So everything that we do, how we relate to one another, how we interact, the kinds of structures that we set up, how we make decisions, all of that is part of our politics. It's part of our philosophical, theoretical basis for the work that we're doing. So when I mention something being political, I don't mean party politics. I mean this bigger kind of view of our basic understanding. And then being very aware that that you're undertaking of, a major challenge when you're trying to create more egalitarian structures to your leadership and your decision making and your structure within your organization. And that all of us come into this work, with all of this conditioning that's gone on because of how we were raised, the family we grew up in, kind of jobs that we've had. Someone mentioned, I think it was Cynthia, that she's worked in a number of pretty hierarchical organizations. Faith-based structures, a lot of faith-based structures are still pretty hierarchical, with kind of that pyramid structure of somebody at the top, and then it kind of goes down from there. And decision-making is top-down oftentimes, as opposed to a more circular model of working together, of collaborating and working together. So as you've got that kind of basis or that background of a theory or a set of values or a set of principles that are driving you, are enticing you to want to create a more egalitarian structure for your organization or program. So that means thinking again consciously and discussing among one another, and then deciding on what kind of changes you're going to make and how you're going to set up the program or the organization. So, looking at what jobs or positions are necessary, and thinking about titles. What kind of titles are you wanting to choose? And then what's the relationship of jobs to one another? How is it that those jobs are going to relate? How is it that people are going to relate to each other in the organization? And how are you going to determine salaries? Or maybe you're not at a place like COPA. We don't yet have salaries, we just have stipends. But thinking about levels of stipends, are there going to be differential levels of what people are able to earn? And what drives that? What's the basis for that? Is it how many years of experience that you bring to the work? Is it, in a lot of hierarchical groups, it's those people that are kind of at the top level, they're earning more, and people that are at the bottom level are earning much less, because that's the way the whole thing is structured. Then also being very mindful and thinking about what kind of decision-making processes are you using? And also what kind of conflict resolution processes are you using when conflicts arise in the organization? So I know, for example, when we set up COPA, early on, we, let's see, is that the next? Sometimes I wonder if I'm skipping ahead. No, okay, that's good. So I'm going to skip though to the bottom here. In COPA, when we were setting up, well, it was probably around the second year or so that we've been organizing ourselves, and we wanted to be using consensus decision making. And so none of us were particularly well trained in using consensus. We may have been using consensus in other programs we were involved with, but we couldn't really articulate fully what are all the principles involved and the steps involved in consensus decision making. So we brought in some people to do training with us, and learned what's called a formal kind of consensus decision making process that we're still using within COPA. Whatever it is, 15 years, about 15 years later. But one of the things about the training also is that you have to keep doing, you can't just do the training once and then think it's gonna continue on with the organization, that you need to kind of keep coming back and adding to the training. But training is really important. So, for example, the workshops that you all are doing, you know, these presentations and the workshops that obviously your organization has been putting on are a good example of being mindful about what are the skills that are needed. You know, what do we need to learn how to do, and what do we need to unlearn? Because that's what we've grown up with. That's what we have experience with. That's what we're comfortable with. I remember when we were starting the Tucson Center for Women and Children, and diversity was a very important concept or principle for us then, and just all the different people that came in to work in that shelter. You know, people like where they talked about, well, what do you mean, you know, that we're going to be in a more egalitarian structure, that we're not going to assume that somebody has more power than somebody else, or we're not going to create structures that build that power differential in. So it was clear that we needed to do training and consciousness raising kind of among ourselves to be fully aware of what we were taking on, what we were doing, and why we were doing it, why it was important, and what we understood and what we didn't understand. So, you know, exploring all of this together, and then reading books. I know from Sapir sent me a link to a particular person that she's going to speak more about, Kazu Haga, who's a partner of ours in Oakland. He has an organization called East Point Peace Academy, and he is a nonviolence trainer. He's a Kingian nonviolence trainer. So those of us involved in nonviolence work through COPA have worked with Kazu for a lot of years. But as Sapir will share, he's an amazing thinker. He's just always thinking about these issues and how to articulate about them. You know, how to sometimes you have to create new language, new words, because these are new concepts really that are evolving as we grow and as we develop, not just personally, but, you know, organizationally and sort of nationally, if you will. So, so reading books, consciously identifying books and articles, dividing up responsibility for doing that and sharing that information, bringing it back to your organization, and recognizing, this is something for COPA, for example, right now, that you have to keep on consciously doing this work, doing the training work and the discussion work and the theorizing work and the questioning work. So it's just an ongoing process. The other thing that I started thinking about, and basically because of your series, the fact that these series of workshops seem to include both diversity, equity, and inclusion and non-hierarchical structures. And so when I saw that, I was thinking to myself, oh, that's an interesting combination. But the more I thought about it and thought about this presentation, the more I realized that there is absolutely an intimate connection, an intrinsic connection of doing non-hierarchical or egalitarian structures of leadership and doing work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because with more egalitarian structures, we are honoring the viewpoints and the ideas and the perspective and the feelings and, you know, the wisdom of all of the people within our organizations and all of their identities that they bring with them, you know, in their work. So who they are and their identities. So by, you know, very definition of the fact that in order to be egalitarian, that means you are valuing the perspectives of all people. That means obviously that gets you, that has to get us into, you know, ongoing work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, so that we're recognizing and valuing, because again, traditionally, dominant culture-wise, clearly there has been a hierarchy of who has power, who's in decision-making positions, who is valued, you know, who earns more, who has better health. I mean, this whole pandemic has brought front and center the inequities, you know, in our way of setting up our everything, you know, our structure of making decisions and doing things and providing health care. And let me take a little sip here. Got my emergency and my water today. This has also made me much more conscious of the definite connection between working on egalitarian structures and consensus decision making overlaps with or is intricately involved with work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, good thing I'm getting to the end of my presentation. So, the other thing is just, you know, realizing, as I said earlier, that we have to keep questioning. We have to keep creating new ways of being together, because things keep changing. New people join our organization. We start partnering with other organizations and have to decide how we want to work together. So all of that, you know, means that there's good reason to have to keep revisiting these issues and learning more and consciously choosing how we're going to operate. Right now, for example, within the Culture of Peace Alliance, and Sapir will talk a little bit more about what the structure is, but we're like an umbrella organization with 13, 12 different groups that are kind of part of under the COPA nonprofit structure umbrella, that are part of it. And on several of them, the Youth and Peace Conference and Take Back the Night and the Nonviolence Legacy Program, all three of those programs that have quite a history. I mean, Take Back the Night goes back to in the 70s here locally and around the country. Nonviolence Legacy Program is about, now it's 11 years old or so. And the Youth and Peace Conference is just coming up to its 10th year. So these are all structures that have some history with them. And even if they've, you know, definitely consciously utilized elements of more egalitarian structures, there's still a fair amount of hierarchy oftentimes involved in some fashion. Someone's is, you know, like the coordinator of the program, and then things sort of coalesce around that coordinator, and that coordinator drives the program. And that's been true for the Youth and Peace Conference. I've been the coordinator, now I'm co-coordinator, and now we're going to look at how to transition that program into probably a more collective structure that will be more sustainable. And the same thing has happened for the Nonviolence Legacy Program. And maybe as we go forward after a little bit, Dorothy, who's on the group that's here today, is part of the new collective that has taken over the management of the Nonviolence Legacy Program. So we're still exploring what are the structures that are most sustainable for these small community-based, you know, kind of organizations or programs, and how can we live up to the principles and the values that we are attempting, you know, how can we walk our talk that we're attempting to be there. So it's just, again, just reminding us all that it's, as I think it was Sapir that mentioned it, it's a pilgrimage, if you will, that we're on. It's a journey that we're on. And I think now we're ready to kind of go on. I want to turn things over now to Sapir. She's, as I mentioned, she's been gathering a lot of information. And after both of our presentations, after she presents her information, then we're going to open things up to a collective discussion and reciprocal learning with one another. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And I will stop sharing at this point. And hopefully if you have any questions or issues, please save them because we'll be definitely opening things up to a Q&A afterwards.
Thank you, Anne. Just doing a sound check again, that everything's okay with my sound? Okay, good. I just want you to know that these PowerPoints will be part of the package that Jennifer and Cynthia send out to you through Raise the Bar. Okay, so I wanted to give you a little bit of a visual on the Culture of Peace Alliance, because we do, okay, I want to share, because we do have okay, of course it's at the end of it rather than the beginning where I want to be. Okay, where's my slideshow from beginning? Okay. Now, can you see it all, or is the images, the gallery blocking it? Hello?
We see it.
We
Okay.
can see it.
We
Yeah.
can see
Okay.
it. We're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so that's our logo, basically. When we look at our structure, you know, Anne talked about the difference between linear and circular and stuff and hierarchical. Well, our main image is a tree, which and we use the velvet mesquite because the unique thing about the velvet mesquite is that its root structure is parallel or equal to the growth of the tree. So if the tree is 6 foot tall, the root is 6 foot long. So that there's a real balance between the root structure and the tree structure. And then I've just, you know, when we thought about it, who are we? We're the root structure. We're what you know, maybe what you don't always see. And then we have affiliates. And now again, remember she talked about mindful of language. So our board of directors is called a coordinating council. And so the coordinating council members are from the affiliates who have voting rights and more responsibilities. They have fiscal responsibilities and things like that, organizational responsibilities. And then if you look at this, the higher up, the branches and leaves, we have a bunch of organizations or events, some that are in the past and some that are current, that we provide a 501c3 for. They're still largely independent, but we do have responsibilities. So we have a fiscal agreement between us because we have shared responsibilities still. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Again, you're going to get this to look at. It doesn't fully explain it, but it gives you this is just kind of to give you a little bit of a visual insight into things. And then I've posted our vision, our mission, and our purpose. And I want you to notice that we don't say non-hierarchical, because when we started, we were so embedded in that concept of collective decision-making, which we have model cooperative decision-making, that we didn't even realize that maybe we might need to say that, you know. So I want you to understand that there's really interesting things that go on when you have your own belief system that's so embedded in you that you don't think of it as a concept that you might need to articulate thoroughly. I mean, I've been so, you know, non-hierarchical stuff is so embedded in my conceptual being that I got fired from a job because I didn't act. This is when you could do that. I didn't, quote unquote, act subservient enough when I was a teenager. So you know, so you do run into conflict, as Beverly noted, that there are some problems when you want to be more egalitarian, non-hierarchical, and you have to interact in a world that is largely hierarchical. There are some challenging realities. So for instance, I may be the, quote, president, but that's for the purpose of signing paperwork. You know, it's not functionally that I am the president. It's a different concept. Okay, next slide. I wanted to give you some visuals of some of the programs that were mentioned by Anne, just to give you some visuals. We've always believed in multi-generational training model, and so you're seeing some of the youth learning how to, they were training how to run the program, the introductory program, how to train each other. I just, you know, we got a grant that brought in several African refugees into the Nonviolence Legacy Program one year. And this is when they graduated from the program that was an Amphi High, funded by Community Foundation of Southern Arizona's African American Initiative Grant. And that's also very interesting because they had, again, that grant wanted specifically to be for organizations that were 100% Black identified youth, not just African Americans, but African could be, you know, but they wanted Black identified youth. And the youth team pushed back against that so hard that it influenced how they proposed their next round. And so we actually got 2 rounds of grants for them, even though the second time, you know, we sort of said, oh, well, literally I said to them, we can't apply for this because we're not 100% African and Black identified, and the youth don't want that. They don't want to be a Black identified group. They said, well, look, you've influenced us so much that what we want to do is we just want to make sure that the money goes to the Black identified youth within the program. And so we're like, okay, we'll apply again. So we got 2 rounds of grants from them. It's very nice. So sometimes you're non-hierarchical, allowing the voices of the youth to speak actually cause shifts that are very positive. I also wanted you to see that our work was so inspiring to Veterans for Peace that they did 1 year what's called the Golden Rule Scholarship. The Golden Rule, I can't go into it, I don't have enough time. Look it up in the internet. That's the boat. It's a boat, not a ship. It's small. And 2 of our over 18 youth were given scholarships and a chaperone, Hassan Clement, who's not in the picture, who is now the focal organizer of the collective. They got to go and learn how to crew on a boat in the Bay Area and do presentations on nonviolence and nuclear resistance throughout the Bay Area. And then this is some images from past Youth and Peace conferences when we could meet. This was 1 year's leadership team. This was the coordinator, co-coordinator of that year. I've known her since she was in high school. We've done a lot of things with her. And then these are circles, dialogue groups that the youth led. We got the youth trained through the Center for Community Dialogue, and they led their own dialogue groups, developed the questions and everything. Okay, so, and then another initiative that is actually not active now is the Peace Walk Tucson. That's one of our affiliates. They're in non-active status or inactive status right now, but they always tried to work again with crossing cultural boundaries between Muslims and Jews to bring together and walk together. Again, and Native Americans were involved. That's a local woman doing who's preparing for the blessing ceremony to start the walk. That's their logo. It is. It has Hebrew and Arabic embedded in the image. And then community conversations. You can see the logo and the thing. And here's just some pictures of what we looked like. There are some younger people, like this young man, but mostly it's adults that come to this. And through that, we did a collaboration with the Nonviolence Legacy Program, the SEMA Foundation, which is a Turkish Muslim group, that he's their volunteer coordinator, and the community conversations to have some nonviolent based conversations about nonviolence in the community. And then I love this quote. I thought this quote was very important to what I'm going to talk about. Yeah. And part of the irony, the paradox of trying to have a non-hierarchical organization. There we go. Thank you for joining us. And so I'm going to stop screen sharing now. If I can do it. Okay. And go back to our full view. Okay. So now you have some, I hope, some satisfying visuals of what COPA and some of its affiliates look like in terms of the participants and the people and some of those goals. Anne talked so well about the structure and everything that I'm actually going to talk more about some of the challenges. So Anne and I are the co-founders, and we hold the history of the organization. We lived the history of the organization. Several of the people that participated in the original group either have died. They've actually died, or they aren't involved anymore. They're doing other things. And so there is, when you talk about non-hierarchical, I think it's very important to be aware of what silent positions you can hold within the organization. Because as founders, people are going to have a tendency to defer to what we say in meetings. So myself, what I really try to do is, and I've had to learn this over the years because I'm very outspoken. And I mean, my ex-husband, one of his criticisms of me, it was like, can't you just not speak we have to admit somebody. Can you admit somebody, please? Jennifer or Cynthia? He's like, can't you just not say your opinions out loud in public? You know, so I'm very opinionated, and I tend to speak in a way that's strong, that makes it, what people have given me the feedback is that, well, it just sounds like it's so definitive. So these are the kind of very subtle things. So what I try to do is not put my 2 cents in first. I try to wait and let other voices emerge. I make an effort to encourage other voices, and that there is no shortcut to communication. That's a quote from my ex-husband. It's the one of the very smart things he said. There just aren't any shortcuts. You're going to have to talk with people. You have to listen with people. Listen more than talk to find out. I mean, these are not new things, but also when you are looking at non-hierarchical,
that becomes really important. You have to develop patience within yourself because it takes time, you know, and I'm not good at advice. I don't know how I can advise someone to transition. I did look up some documentation that I'll share links that Jennifer and Cynthia will send to you. But I think it's really important to understand that some of the qualities you need to develop are how to not jump in and let people get to the end of their thoughts. You know, so if time is a concern for you, like can be for me, you have to really go, okay, do I really want to do a non-hierarchical structure? And, you know, what parts of it can I really value? So maybe, you know, and what does it really mean, like Anne was saying? So, you know, who buys the paper clips might not be a good decision to put up for collective decision making. You know, that there are small things that don't have the weight of, well, how do we decide salaries and what that means, and stipends, and what that means to people and how that affects people. That might be more important to put that within the collective decision making, you know, if it's possible. You know, maybe it's not possible. I don't, you know, these are all very individual things. The other thing that I try to resist doing is using lingo. Now, it's not that I don't know it, and it's not that I don't want to use it so that people know that I'm in the know about non-hierarchical stuff, you know, but who are you talking to when you're using it? And what is the reason you're using it? You know, and is it more important to show off your knowledge, or is it more important to draw people out and not have them feel like they know less than you? You know, and therefore, again, those ironies of non-hierarchy. And therefore, you know more about non-hierarchical organizations than they do. So they ought to defer to you because of that. So these are deep things. And I think Innocent can really, I've heard her talk about things. And I believe that I'm touching things that she can resonate with about, you know, so you have to think about who you're talking to. And when you, like, I liked how Anne brought forward the personal as political and framed it within a context. So it wasn't like she was holding that over us. She was sharing with us in a very open-handed, open-hearted, open-minded way what they used in the beginning as a basis for forming the Women's Center, the Women and Children Center, and the Rape Crisis Center, and things like that. And I also was part of a collective in Toronto that created the first Rape Crisis Center in Toronto, you know, and the same is true of, I also helped develop Snowflake Parent and Child Collective Daycare Center that I haven't checked recently, but 25 years after I was part of the collective that founded that, it was still going. And a friend of mine who had, now her child was going there, had sent that to me because she knew I'd started that, you know. So that's part of how do you step out of organizations and let power go. Now, I know, like Beverly, I know a bit about her organization, and it would be very hard for her to have a fully non-hierarchical candlelighters, because she is so important to the running and the success of that program. And that has to be acknowledged as well. So sometimes it's not so much about looking at non-hierarchical, but as transitional.
how do you transition your organization so that other people can take it over when you can no longer do that? And they will decide how hierarchical or non-hierarchical it will be. You can say, I want it to be this, but if you're truly going to be able to let go of if you truly want a power share, in Innocent's words, that power sharing idea, then transition might be the more appropriate way to examine your organizational structure rather than trying to change everything totally. Those are mainly the things I want to say. I do want to talk about if you're going to have youth involved, that is very complex because I think that doing the online, like for instance, the Youth and Peace Conference, Anne started the concept of having a youth leadership team. I took it over a couple of years after she started it and really pushed to make it robust and used really, what I found is if you're going to have youth come together, you have to provide transportation and you have to feed them. It could be bus things. It could be, you have to be involved with them. You can't, they're just not going to, and their families. You might have to be involved with their families, particularly if you want to look at diversity as part of your, and inclusivity as part of what your goals are. So online becomes much more helpful because they don't have to go anywhere. I mean, it's sad that you don't get to feed them. I mean, we like feeding them, but you don't have to have that in your budget all of a sudden because it's tremendously expensive to feed a dozen young people. They like to eat and they need to eat, And when we had our youth leadership summer trainings, we're talking about maybe 20 hungry teenagers, snacks, lunch, and they were very clear they wanted hot food, not just sandwiches, So, there's things that you need to think about that are important for you or me to think about as the organizer of something that isn't really part of the non-hierarchical structure, but will contribute to the success of integrating aspects of a non-hierarchical. Oh, Stella, hi, welcome. You're new. I hope you can follow us.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
thank you.
So the other thing when thinking about youth and teenagers is they are not really encouraged. Their voices are not encouraged. So I found I needed to make an extra effort when they joined our workshop committee, which was adults. We needed to make an extra effort, and I personally tried to do this, to ask for their voices, to invite them in. And that kind of is one of the hidden things that makes it difficult to be non-hierarchical because there's societal structures that Anne talked about in place that it's hard for youth to defy, So if adults are talking in a lot of cultures, the youth don't. They just don't. They go off and they do their own thing. So there has to be almost a hierarchical way of inviting them into a non-hierarchical structure. So there's all these ironies that abound that have to be thought about and considered and managed in ways that give them an understanding that you really mean this. You really authentically want to know what they have to say. You're really authentically willing to hear what they have to say. And this is true even with adults when you're talking about people within who are hired within for positions that have, let's say I'm a manager of a team of 6,
and I am within the structure of the organization, I manage the program. So finding that balance between making sure that they honor their responsibilities and that they have to report to me, that's a reality, and finding non-hierarchical or less structured ways to authentically make that real. So that becomes a very creative balancing act. And it tends to have to do, for me, with really making sure that I am patient, that I listen to what's happening with them first before I put out my concerns or my worries or my viewpoint on it. So let's say I have someone who is always late, and it exacerbates me. Well, first of all, I tend to think, why do I have to be exacerbated? Why can't I just feel like it's the first time it ever happened? And we're talking, I think this is true whether you're paying them or they're volunteers or not, we can look at it in either way. So how do I respond to that? Well, first I want to know, how's my time going? I want to know what is it? What's happening that they're late? And I want to listen to that and respond to that with kindness and with consideration, because to them, what I've seen to them, it can be very global what's happening with them. It can be so global that they can't manage anything outside of that, like my needs or my concerns. And so once I can truly honor their barriers, what's going on with them, and kind of see it like, for instance, there's a woman I know who's deaf. Now, I don't fully understand deafness, but I've noticed that it seems to come with a lot of other physical problems that she has. It's not just that she doesn't hear clearly. It's that there's a whole web of things that I know nothing about that affect her physical ability to get anywhere on time, to say nothing about the fact that she has to ride a bike or ride the bus and may not have the money for the bus. It can be so complex. On top of that, I believe firmly that she wants to do what she says she does. So it becomes, to me, even more important that I honor that first before I say how it might affect me, before I make it clear to her what my need is. Because then she can relax and let go of some of her guilt that she might be feeling. Anyway, it's like that. It's deep like that. And that can be, and so if you don't want to take on that kind of depth of relationship, maybe non-hierarchical, not for your organization or not for you personally, but thinking about transition as you move out of your position into another phase of your organization is more where you're at. Okay, so I'm going to stop there so that I can talk more, but I don't want to put any of you to sleep, for instance.
Satbir, can you say a little bit of something about East Point Peace Academy and the turquoise model and some of the work that Kazu has been doing, just to kind of introduce people to some of those concepts, and then they can follow up with some of the resource material and the links, like the link to that one webinar that I believe you're sending people.
Well, Jennifer will be. Yes, Jennifer.
Okay. If you'd like to take a few minutes to do that, and then I think it would be great to open up, because I suspect people have a lot of questions, and I also really want to hear from you in terms of tactically how things have gone.
I think that when Jennifer first asked me, I went, oh my God, how can I'm no expert. So I started looking for experts, right? Again, that irony. And I did find a wonderful webinar
as Ann is mentioning, I don't want to try to describe it. The new word, as I just talked about not using lingo, is teal businesses.
Teal.
That's the new word. And I think I love the color, so I'm okay with it. But I think that I don't want to talk about it very much because that's not what we're doing yet. But it opened me up to the idea that there is a lot more we can be doing. COPA itself can be doing. For instance, they have a trust economy around reimbursement, where they don't require them to request it and honor it, sign it. Everyone is responsible for, they can sign their own check for reimbursement and then document it. And then if there's problems, it'll be found after the fact. You know, that's really unusual. We don't do that. That's not what we do. You know, so I think that they have some really good ideas that are worth exploring for people that want to go further. But I really want to hear from other people and hear questions.
Great. There are a couple questions in the chat, so I'll read one to start us off from Innocent Saunders. Even though non-hierarchical is not language explicitly used to describe your structure, do you find yourself having to explain this to constituents or prospective partners, funders, etc.? And if so, is there typically any pushback because of it?
Yes, and yes. We have been denied grants by a very wonderful peace development fund because they could not understand our organizational structure. So we have struggled, excuse me for scratching my nose in front of you. We have struggled to figure out ways to articulate what we do and how we are in ways that make sense to grant to funders and constituents and ourselves even. We've worked on that quite a lot. Yes. Yeah. Ann, did you want to say anything?
Well, just thinking about, for example, the Youth and Peace Conference that both of us, both Sapir and myself, have mentioned a couple of times, and the youth leadership team that we have, that the notion that we want youth to be in charge of their own youth and peace conference. It's their conference. And so for them to be selecting the title and the theme and, you know, choosing workshops, helping to choose the workshops, identifying guest speakers they want to have, structuring the opening and closing ceremonies, all of that. Well, we also work with another group that does also another youth leadership conference, the LULAC conference. Probably a number of you are familiar with the LULAC conference because it's been going in Tucson for over 30 years now. It's a youth leadership conference. And we've partnered now with them. We're much younger than them. You know, we're just going on to 10 years. As I said, they've been going for about 30 years. So, but it's interesting because they have a youth leadership conference. That's kind of how they frame their conference. But youth are not necessarily in a real leadership role. They do interact and work with the Metropolitan Education Commission and the Youth Advisory Committee that's with that organization to get input of youth to the Youth Leadership Conference, but not to the extent that the Youth and Peace Conference has a youth leadership team that is really core in decision making for that conference. So in partnering with them, we've had to kind of work out some of those differences, some of those kind of really core differences in how we envision the structure for the organization and honor kind of one another's work, you know, and respect the different work that's going on, but also be able to speak up for those aspects of youth leadership that we feel so strongly about.
Thank you, Ann. I have a question for the both of you. Ann, the group is experiencing some feedback from yours, so I'm just going to mute you until you want to talk. I'm not sure why. So you know, I think you both did a remarkable job of really walking us through how it's worked for you and some challenges, and really the use of language and thinking about the language you use and what it really means, and whether it fully represents your philosophy, right? Like the organization's philosophy. And I wondered if you'd speak a little more about how you know, maybe from your experience, if you have it, or if anyone else does on the call and they want to chime in, how the rubber meets the road when you're actually having to work through some of these issues. So for example, you know, I see a big difference between collective or collaborative decision-making versus consensus versus non-hierarchical leadership. And I think that there's a tendency right now to talk a lot about non-hierarchical leadership, and people may in theory agree until it comes time to thinking about, you know, should people be paid, and if so, how, and who gets to decide that, and then those kinds of things. So could you share with the group maybe an example or two of a time where, you know, you really had to take a lot more time maybe, or work through something, and what that looked like, you know, whether it was sort of what that looked like. I don't know how much more I want to say about that.
Sure. I think we both can comment on that. Anne, do you want to go first? Okay. So I want you to know that to talk about specific examples is it's very hard to do that, because a lot of it we're close to in time, and I don't want to use people's names, and so it's a little bit challenging to do, and I don't know that I can really do it. But let's say I can speak. So one of the things that's built into our bylaws is that when we come into a conflict, we will use mediation of some kind to come to resolution. So we have built into the structure methodologies that we can call on. Mostly we can do it. We also, okay, I'm sorry, so let me slow down. Also within our meetings, many of the subjects we will want to hear everyone at the table, their voice, and so we will do it in a circles format. Now, when you're doing it virtually, it is very helpful to have whoever is facilitating call on people, because it can be confusing to just have people speak out, particularly like in this size of a group. You know, people will hold back, and then all of a sudden 6 people will do, you know, it can be very confusing and inefficient. So so for efficiency's sake, we have the facilitator call on people. Now, the kind of facilitation I really like is more neutral, that doesn't either thanks every single person for speaking or doesn't thank anyone. So doesn't develop a feeling that, oh, somehow, you know, very unconsciously, oh, they like what I said better than they like what they said, you know, because they said thank you to me, or they said, oh, good idea, you know, and that is really challenging to do, really challenging, because I'm going to speak personally. I mean, some of the ideas really resonate, and I want to, you know, go, oh yeah, hot idea, you know. So what happens when the next person puts forward their idea? Is their idea not as hot? You know, it's very challenging, but that's the minute detail that it's important to consider. Okay. So I have done mediation within the organization that worked really well. And I've done other mediation that just didn't. I thought it was on point, but it just did not work. But I think one of the key things is knowing that I'm a co-founder and therefore in I will be seen as holding more power. How am I going to let that go? So here's an example I can use because it's me. We had a retreat. I thought we'd planned it collectively. I thought we'd agreed on the agenda collectively. I get into the meeting and I was supposed to facilitate it. Every single step of the way, I met resistance. And it was extraordinarily frustrating. And I got concerned that we were not going to have our planning. We were not going to get to it because there was so much resistance to what I thought we'd agreed on that I was putting forward. So we took a break and I went in the bathroom and cried. I cried, because it hurt, and I thought I've got to get this out of the way because it's more important to me that we succeed than that my vision be, whatever. I hold on to the power of my position or my reality or my whatever, that I want us to succeed. So I went back in the room, after I washed my face and kind of put on my neutral face again and said, it just seems like it's not working with me facilitating. So I am removing myself from that role and allowing you all to decide how you want to proceed. And I made sure they knew it's because I want us to succeed. I want us to have a successful planning session. That's more important to me than anything else. We can throw out the whole agenda. I don't care, whatever will allow us to move forward. But the one thing I said is I am removing myself from facilitating, period. I actually removed myself from facilitating the coordinating council meetings because by default, people were just, letting me do it because, it's sort of something that people tend to resist. And that created this space. And we did succeed. We did finish the planning session. It did work, and I think it's really important to self-evaluate how much you're willing to let go of any perceived power, in even subtle ways in order to do anything that moves towards a more collective decision making, a more non-hierarchical. And if you don't want to, oh, so what? Okay, then don't try to become non-hierarchical. Find other places within other methods to bring in other voices that are still authentic, but that you're honest, because I think people more than anything else, they want us to be honest with them about what is the structure and how much can we allow decision making to be what are the different ways that we can actually authentically support decision making. Does that help, Jennifer? I know I talked a bit, but okay, you're muted, Jennifer.
Absolutely. I think that those, like that, you made some really important points, and I think that that's what people want to hear. Like, well, it's not that easy, and it actually took us, 4 years to figure out a structure. Or if you go this model, instead of being able to get something done in 1 day, you should plan 3 weeks, or whatever.
Yes.
Those kinds of very
Yes, you need time. You need time. That's absolutely accurate, and patience. Yes.
And I think the point you raised about how, like, maybe you don't really want to go non-hierarchical, and also maybe that's okay. Like giving yourself permission to really figure out what's going to work for your group and figure out the language, and then do that. But feel like you can live by that. I think that's a super awesome point. So Innocent says, yeah, being honest about the structure and allowing yourself to rest anywhere along the continuum is important. We have a few other questions or thoughts that were in the chat that I wanted to send your way. Georgia Conroy mentions or asks, how can you let go of the reality that you own your project when you've eagerly started working on it, but want to draw a truly inclusive group to to hear. Is that, you want to take that on?
And do you,
Can I just add something, please?
Pardon?
And I wrote it in haste in a way. When I'm saying to add to it, I'm kind of really illustrating my lack of awareness here, because I think it, and I'm listening to Satbir, what happened with her. So she's partially answering this question. You know, you want something to happen, but you have to set your priorities. You know, do you want to have an inclusive group in the very, very start? Do you want to have that really inclusive group? Then you need to let go and just let them know what you want, but what do they want? How do they see it? Right at the very beginning. So it's a matter of, I think, letting go. And it's very interesting. It's so triggering. This is such a primal kind of thing. Sabir, thank you for being so graphic in your explanation. It can be very, very intense. So I think I don't need to have it explained too much. I think I learned. Thank you.
And maybe I can share one other example that also speaks to that. So I actually, Satbir and I together co-founded the Nonviolence Legacy Program early on, when it began in 2009. And then I became the program manager, and I was the program manager for a chunk of years, a bunch of years. And then Hassan Clement, which some of you know, took over. I was trying to retire. I was trying to retire from the Nonviolence Legacy Program because I had shifted really my energy to the Youth and Peace Conference, as well as to COPA. So I was trying to step away from the Nonviolence Legacy Program and let others take it over. But I still held a lot of the history and the knowledge, and particularly the financial management issues, because I had been both the grant writer for it as well as the program coordinator for it. So even though other people started stepping in and doing things around the programmatic part of it, on the financial responsibility part of it, that's where I was still involved in that. So one of the things is, and I think Innocence has was drawing attention to the fact too, that it's going to take a while, you know, it is going to take time. And particularly if you were the founder or the original coordinator, you know, you were the one that brought that passion, that energy, pulled people together, oversaw things, and then you need to step away. Well, it isn't just a process of, you know, even when people threw a wonderful retirement party for me, it was a complete surprise. It was just an amazing, wonderful party. And it was like, wait a minute, I don't know that I'm quite ready or that we're quite ready for the retirement, but it was like, okay, retirement party has happened. But recognizing, again, that's part of that consciousness of being aware of how you still hold power. So Sapir was sort of talking about the ways that we consciously and unconsciously hold power in organizations. And I think kind of an answer to what Georgia was just referring to is the earlier in the process of things that you can kind of collectivize the process and have more people, bring more people together so that collectively people are making decisions about how the program's going to operate, how it's going to function, who's going to do what, how you're going to divide responsibilities. And now, 10 years after, a little bit more like 11 years after the Nonviolence Legacy Program began, a group of people, Dorothy is involved, Dorothy Barth is one of the people involved, have formed a collective. So it's youth trainers and adult trainers together. It's a core group of youth and adults who all have been involved with the program over a period of years. And they took over the management. The two people who were kind of in charge of it, they were ready to transition to do other things. And this group of people, youth and adult trainers, have now collectively been working. They were working for almost 9 months, I think, leading up to the time when the transition of responsibility, management responsibility, to turn things over to the collective, for them to be running the program. And that's what's happening now. And I have completely now been able to step away and be fully retired from the program. So even though we tried to form it more as a collective, when I was still involved, I think some of the ways that I held power got in the way of it being able to be actually be a real collective. So I am incredibly grateful to the people that have been involved in forming, and they've been meeting every week or every other week for months now, preparing. And then as of in August, they took over the management of the program. So again, that's giving yourselves time, recognizing that it is a process, and being conscious about the changes you're trying to make, and being willing to recognize when something's not working and examining why, what's behind that, and being able to do that in a way that doesn't, get into defensiveness, us getting defensive about our involvement or our positions or who we are or what we do, as Sabir was talking about.
Thank you, Anne. We have another question. This one's from Mike Rohrbach in the chat. He'd like to hear more about sharing the 501c3. So is Mike still on the call, or did he step off? He's on the call. So it says, say some more about sharing the 501c3 is done also, or maybe it's how it's done, vis-a-vis fiscal control. So
Yes, I'm still here.
okay, yes. Mike, you want to run with that?
Yeah, Sabir had mentioned in passing when she showed the tree something about sharing the 501c3. It is something that I am very interested in terms of adopting partner nonprofit organizations, potentially absorbing them into our network. Or if I find an individual who's not yet incorporated, to bring that individual in under a 501c3 umbrella that we can provide. I don't know that Sabir was talking about that particular structure.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so it's interesting. I heard some languaging in how you talked about, okay, what's happening? Not hearing me?
It's weak.
Weak. Okay, hang on. Is that better?
No, but I guess we can hear you.
Is that better now?
A little better.
Oh. See, Anne, sometimes these stop working.
There you go. Oops.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, that's great now.
Okay, that's without that. I think they heat it up or something and they stop working. Okay. There's a lot in the way you present your question that I'd like to unpack a little bit. First of all, the IRS does require that we have oversight on fiscal management. If a 501c3, as a 501c3, if a group that does not have a 501c3 wants to use it, then we are required, we have fiscal legal responsibility.
Yes.
Not control, but responsibilities. Because we wanted to make this available to groups in the community, the first one that came to us was Take Back the Night. That's what opened up the possibility, because the situation within the nonprofit community changed, and federally, and all the prevention monies went away, or most of them. So that meant they could no longer support Take Back the Night. And because we'd worked with Kate Meyer, who was sort of the lead coordinator at that time in many ways, she came to us asking if we would be interested. So that's what opened us up. It wasn't like an intention that we were going to do this. It got opened up by a request from the community for something that we all, the coordinating council, really value as present in the community. And I have never effectively understood the differences and the different kinds of fiscal management. We had a training in it. I still could not articulate to you the three main categories and their differences and which one are we using. I'm sorry. So we went ahead and did it for me without even having that. But clearly, we need to have some understanding that they are aligned with our mission and values, that their mission and values are aligned with ours. Not the other way around. It does have to be like that because we're the 501c3. And that we ask them to manage their own books, generally. We're not going to talk about that right now, which has to do with grants that have been written that we receive the money, COPA receives the money for. And to give us within a certain period of time or after the event, if it is just an event, or within regular periods of time over the course of the year, if it's an ongoing program like say Flutes for Vet or Take Back the Night, which is both. Well, Take Back the Night is a one-time event, but the concerns around the fiscal responsibilities are a bit more complicated with them. So, and we found that for the most part, that works. There was one year with Take Back the Night where the current leadership team, all of them transitioned out with virtually no transition time. And the new leadership team did not fully comprehend what the fiscal responsibilities were. But I didn't know that personally because I wasn't involved in I hadn't involved myself enough in understanding their transition and what they might need. So they spent more money than they had and went into the red, and we're still kind of dealing with it now, a year, it was 2019. So, a little bit more than a year later. And very clearly, we as in the 501c3 do have fiscal responsibilities to understand not just theoretically what happened, but also in a spreadsheet kind of way, what the monies were, what came in, what went out, what wasn't paid, and what money still needs to be raised to cover it. And Anne really took care of this. It was multiple contacts with people that had said, we never want to hear from any of you ever again, but we had to. So Anne really thought about language, and in a collective way with the current leadership team, we looked at it, we examined it, we went back several times, back to them to get, clarification. And we are almost at a resolution now where we can actually move forward because we'll know how much money we need to still raise. And it's not very much, thankfully, but it was a real learning lesson about fiscal management. So I think that bottom line, it's important for the 501c3 to understand what their fiscal responsibility is and to look into the different management styles. And if you're more competent than me at getting it, to choose one that you want to use that works with your 501c3. But again, the bottom line things, again, to reiterate them, Mike, are they must be aligned with your mission. That's your mission vision. They must. That's a bottom line thing, because they're going to use your 501c3 to raise money. You must, it's very complicated. There's a lot of legalities. I don't want to go into it. There now is a whole thing of you have to, for them to have their own account, they have to do a whole legal thing. And I don't want to go into the details of it now. We do that. Everyone else that came in before that law changed, or regulation, I think it is, changed, can just be managed under our own bank accounts. But, yeah, so there are some legal things you need to examine and look into to figure out if you really want to do that. And we can share with you all our, it's not quite updated, but so when it's updated, we will share with you all, if you want, through Jennifer and Raise the Bar, our fiscal sponsorship agreement that has two sides to it, what we're responsible for and what they're responsible for.
I would definitely be interested in that. Again, our case is that we work everything in partnership, and some of the individuals that we work with are not incorporated. And this is a potential tool, and I'd never heard anyone else talking about it, so I'm very, very happy to know that it actually can be done and is legal to do.
Yeah, there are ways to do it. Community Foundation of Southern Arizona used to do it. They don't do it anymore. Alliance for Global Justice does do it. So maybe you can find on their website some of their ways they approach it too, because they have a different model. They have like 500 organizations. We have like, 12. So.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Ann, did you want to add anything?
Well, and Dorothy's, as our treasurer, is on this webinar as well, so she might want to speak up a little bit about these issues. And again, we are learning as we go. As Sapir said, when Take Back the Night, which was actually involved with 2 other sexual assault prevention programs. One was called Hey Baby, Art Against Sexual Violence, and they're still with us. They've recently changed their name to Disentangler. Interesting theoretical concept behind that whole change of name. And then Denim Day Tucson is also, those all 3 sexual assault prevention programs all came to us at the same time to see if we would become their fiscal sponsor, their fiscal agent. So as Mike was just raising, there are actually a fair number of organizations that provide fiscal sponsorship or fiscal agency, if you will, for other groups that don't have nonprofit, that don't have their own nonprofit status. And that because it's become, increasingly expensive to get your 501c3, get your nonprofit status, as well as being much more complicated. So it turns out at one point, 2 of the programs that got started under COPA, Peace Circles and Elder Circles, we turned those programs over to Our Family Services, to the Center for Community Dialogue and Training, because they were doing so much circle work. And it just made sense. And Del Jones, who was the founder of Elder Circles, was working very closely with Catherine Tornbaum. And so we met with Our Family Services and the Center for Community Dialogue. We looked at how we were going to turn over those 2 programs, and we considered turning all of COPA over to Our Family, because we were concerned about our administrative capacity. But as we thought about it, there were several reasons why we decided not to turn over all of COPA. One, it seemed that there were definitely groups in the community that were more activist oriented, social justice oriented, that needed a fiscal sponsor, needed an umbrella organization they could be part of. And they weren't a service kind of organization. They were an activist kind of an organization. And Culture of Peace Alliance fit much better as a structure for them to come under than our family services, that was much more of a social service organization and service oriented. And also there was an issue of stipends, being able to pay stipends to people who were doing organizing work for the different programs. And under our family structure, those would all be considered volunteer positions. So even if we, the programs hadn't been able to pay high levels of stipends, it was important for many of the coordinators to be able to receive at least some kind of remuneration for the work that they were doing. And that wasn't going to be possible if those programs moved over to our family services. So we made a collective decision to stay as our own independent Culture of Peace Alliance and be available for other groups to be able to come under that umbrella. And we're still learning how to do that, how to handle the fiscal issues. This, what happened with Take Back the Night, has definitely made us more mindful of making sure that we get either annual or quarterly financial reports from any of the groups that we are the financial agent or financial sponsor for.
I know where your email address is, so I need to go. Sorry, terrific, really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Mike. So I also want to just add a clarification, and this is something that, we can do a session on if folks want to, but there's actually a legal difference in the definition of a fiscal agent versus a fiscal sponsor, where fiscal sponsor is really an entity that takes on your fiscal liability and does things for you, versus a fiscal agent, which is typically on a collaborative grant or something like that, where one organization serves as the lead to bring in the money, distribute it, utilize it, etc., to various partners that are independent. So for the purposes of this conversation, I just wanted to articulate that to folks on the call who may be, for whom that language might be new, or assumed to be synonymous, because from an IRS standpoint, it's not synonymous at all. Are there other questions? We promised you 2 to 4. We're pretty close to the end, but there's about 5 more minutes here. And if you'd like to ask any of the presenters or anyone else on the call who's here with COPA any questions, we have a few more minutes. I'm just going to check the chat one more time to see if anyone had placed something else in the chat.
I was just going to say for Satbir to sort of go into the differences between fiscally sponsored and affiliated.
But I did that already, Beth, when I...
Oh, my apologies then.
Just missed it.
All right. Well, we have one more logging off soon. So for those of you who are still here, go ahead and take a look at the chat. A number of people did have to go because they have a 4 o'clock, but thanked us very much for the session and found it really valuable. I want to, if there's nothing else, I really want to extend my deepest thanks to both Anne and Satbir for being willing to come and have this courageous conversation with all of us and to really put it out there, how they've done it. And what's worked and what's taken more effort along the way. I think it really provides a roadmap for a lot of people who've had questions of us and of the other presenters as we've sponsored and supported this series. We will make this recording and the information available both in email and on our YouTube page. So if you went ahead and signed up for the session today, which you all have, you'll receive a follow-up email. And we don't have any intentions of taking the video down anytime soon. So please do spread the word for anyone else who was unable to join us. And I just want to wish you all very happy holidays. We're going to be back at the beginning of the year with a new series. And until then, wishing you and your families and your coworkers all the best. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. I feel so inspired and energized just being able to share with you all. I really thank you so much.
And what you just added, Jennifer, about the difference between fiscal agency and fiscal sponsor, I've got to go find out more about that, because you're right. I was using those terms interchangeably, and they're obviously not interchangeable. So it's always a question of living and learning.
Right? Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.